what happened in her clinic and to her colleagues. Friends, it left a mark on her life. Trauma and fear are very real emotions that we are not set up to automatically handle well. We're just not wired to be able to handle trauma and fear very well. So where is God when trauma and fear invade and grip our lives? And how does God help us cope when we fear, when we feel that we are so small and so vulnerable to life itself? So come, let's find out what God does. Today, we're continuing our series called Jesus is Saying, Follow Me. And today we are following Jesus once again. Today, he and his 3 companions are walking up a very large mountain. He's leading us there. He's taking Peter, James, and John. He's taking all of us up to this mountain. We have our trusty tour guide, Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark, to fill in the details. Let's watch how he explains or how he reveals what happened. If you go to the next slide. From Mark chapter 9, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain to be alone. Suddenly, Jesus' appearance was transformed. His clothes became beyond dazzling white. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter exclaimed, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 memorial shelters. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Listen to this very carefully now. Peter said this because he didn't really know what to say, for they were all terrified. The transfiguration of Jesus Christ is one of the most mystical stories in the Gospels. 3 of Jesus' closest companions and friends were eyewitnesses to this event. But friends, there is much more going on here than some mystical Twilight Zone story. Friends, this was a terrifying moment in the lives of Peter, James, and John. They were scared. They were speechless. And as our story unfolds, Peter is trying to say something, anything, but he can't get his words out. He can't get the right words out. His words are getting caught in his very voice because he is afraid. But he tries. He says, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here, I think. Let us make some memorials for you. One for you. One for Moses. One for Elijah. He can't get his words out. Pastor Bristol, who pastors the church that my cousin goes to, she makes a very interesting comment when she says, this is one of the Bible stories where we have to feel our way through. We're going to have to feel our way through this one. Jesus' transfiguration is something that we may not be able to wrap our theological heads around, and that's okay. But today, you and I most certainly can wrap our hearts around the confusion and the fear and the uncertainty and the traumatization that Peter, James, and John felt that day. What I want you to see this morning is you go up to the very first verse on the screen. I want you to see the word led. Do you see it? Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them to that high mountain. He led them. Jesus Christ knew exactly what he was doing that day. He knew exactly where he was going that day, and he knew exactly why he was taking his three closest friends with him that day. But Peter, James, and John didn't know why they were going with him. He didn't tell them. He just said, we're going up to the mountain, and I'm only going to take my three closest friends with me. They have no clue what's about to unfold, just like those at the Elina Clinic that morning had no clue what was coming next. And so Jesus brings Peter, James, and John up that mountain on purpose. On purpose. And they stop at the summit. And all of a sudden, Jesus' appearance suddenly changes. His appearance dramatically changes, and they don't know what to do about it. All of a sudden, they are startled beyond belief. If you and I were James, Peter, John, we would be saying, what is going on? Our hearts would begin to race. There would be confusion. All of a sudden, Jesus' clothes are turning a dazzling white, and they're looking at something that they can hardly believe. And then, out of the blue, suddenly, two ancient, ghost-like prophets who lived hundreds of years before all of a sudden appear right next to Jesus. Moses and Elijah. They don't know who they are. They never saw them before, but they're identified. And now they're scared. These are two ghosts that had lived hundreds of years ago. Friends, this is spooky, scary stuff. And Mark tells us they were all terrified. And we'd be terrified too, wouldn't we? In fact, Luke's gospel tells us that Jesus' appearance was so bright that they had to cover their eyes. They had to turn their heads away. It was like trying to stare into the sun itself. If you go to the next slide, Mark continues to relive these moments. And then a cloud overshadowed them. And a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved son. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they only saw Jesus with them. A cloud banks over. Moses and Elijah disappear, and now it's only Jesus with them. But then their fear rises again because now they hear this voice booming, and they don't know where it's coming from. "This is my beloved son, my well-loved son. Listen to him." And these three disciples stand frozen in time. But now it's only Jesus with them. Friends, why would Jesus put his three closest friends